Hello ladies and gentlemen, it's Mike here at Gamefromscratch, and today we're going to do something slightly different. What we're going to do is focus on the frameworks that exist out there. Now, the definition of a framework can be a little iffy. I'm looking at things that provide common game development functionality, rendering, input handling, sound management, and so on. But in some cases, we're also going to just straight out talk about some things that are just basically graphics libraries. So these are things you can use as building blocks for making your own game engines. Now, they're not full game engines because they don't have all of the tooling. A lot of times there is no editor involved. These are great, again, building blocks if you want to create your own engine, but you don't want to start completely from scratch, or if your game is more code-focused in nature and you don't need all of the toolings that something like Unreal, Unity, or Godot provide for you. So without further ado, let us do a quick run-through of some of the most popular game frameworks that exist out there, and we'll start with one of the daddies, and that is SDL. Now, SDL, the Simple Direct Media Layer, is an open-source library, been around forever. This is used as the front-end porting language for so many Linux games, it's not even worth mentioning. But this guy handles, OpenGL, direct 3D rendering, input handling, and more. There's language bindings for just about every language you could ever imagine. It is also free and open source. Valve is a supporter of the SDL project, and again, it's used to port a number of games to different platforms. Another one in the similar vein to SDL, but this is basically let's redesign SDL, but make it a little bit more modern and C++ based instead of C based. If you do that, you get SFML, the Simple, Fast, and Multimedia Library. This is an abstraction over top of something like OpenGL. It provides 5 different modular layers: the system settings, the windows, the graphics, the audio, and the networking components. Again, it's kind of like SDL, but for C++. Next up, we have Allegro. This is another one. It's very old. It kind of amazes me that it's still actually being updated and handled. This was actually started by one of the guys that went on to work at Microsoft on FNA and some other cool projects. This one I also think started life as an Atari library, which is where the A in Allegro comes from. But this is a very interesting project. Again, it provides all of those common things that SDL and SFML provide, C++ and C-based API. And then we've got Raylib. It's the most modern of all of these. I'm a big fan of Raylib. I've covered it multiple times on this channel. One of the really cool things about Raylib, this is a C library, and generally it's single file headers, so you can actually take them and use them in a particular, just that piece that if you wish. So there's a bunch of modulars here that can be used in different pieces. There's a number of different built on top libraries, like for math and GL and audio, etc., on top of the core tools that are here. There are some tools in here too for things like handling fonts and UIs, etc. And as you can see, there are language bindings for just about every language under the sun. If you're looking for a very nice introduction to C programming for games, Raylib is probably my #1 suggestion in this regard. And then we've got Cocos 2DX. Now, Cocos 2DX is based off of Cocos 2D, which is based off of Cocos, which is based off of, I think, the Old Testament. This is a project that goes back in time, very, very long time ago. I think it started life as a Python library, but it's switched between a number of different languages in between. The Cocos 2DX is the C++ version of it. It is, again, open source. The name is also being used now by Cocos, the Cocos creator. By the way, the Cocos creator is also built on a custom fork of Cocos that is available as well. So if you're looking for, again, another cross-platform code-based C++-based library, Cocos is definitely worth checking out. And then finally, there is Orcs. I've covered Orcs, I think, twice in the past on the channel. It is another interesting framework. The big thing with Orcs for C and C++ developers, but it's actually data-driven. It's got a completely different approach to how you develop your games. I really can't get into the details enough to explain it well in this particular video, but if the idea of working with C++ at a low level but doing it in a different manner appeals to you, check out Orcs. It is a very cool project with a very different approach. So again, a data-driven game engine. It's probably most similar to Bevy, which, spoiler alert, may show up later on in this video. But if you're looking, again, open source C++ based library. Now we're going to move on to the world of C#. Now the interesting thing about C# is there's not actually that many open source frameworks built with C#. Again, I think Unity takes a lot of the oxygen out of the room in that regard. And there's a ton of C# based game engines, as you've probably seen on the channel in the last little while. But when it comes to low level frameworks, there's definitely 2 dominant players. There's Monogame, which just got a huge huge update, a bunch of financial support, which is very cool. Monogame is a modern recreation of Microsoft's XNA framework. It is used to create a ton of successful commercial indie titles. Probably one of the most successful frameworks I'm talking about today. Things like, for example, Celeste. Again, Monogame is responsible for a ton of successful indie games out there. It's kind of carrying on the spirit of XNA, and Microsoft's XNA was absolutely amazing, and I can't believe they killed that project off. But Monogame picked it up, brought it to other platforms, and is carrying the torch and keeping it modern and adding new features. So Monogame, if you're looking for a code-based C# framework, definitely check out Monogame. However, if Monogame doesn't work for you and you're more about XNA, but you want to stay like true to the source, just bring it to other platforms, there's also FNA. Now, FNA is a modernization, or I guess almost a maintenance release of XNA, just one that runs on modern hardware and multiple different platforms, including consoles, Nintendo Switch, Stadia, RIP Stadia. So it again has been used, you can see from the titles to the side here, Rogue Legacy, Axiom Verge, etc. This is another core piece. It's also got a huge amount of funding as well. They just got a $100,000 grant and $1,000 a month in development support. So both Monogame and FNA have a very nice future. Now, if you never got the chance to play around with XNA back in the day, there's a reason why these two projects exist. It was a great framework, and again, it's such a shame that Microsoft killed it off. Then we're moving on to JavaScript/HTML5. My number one recommendation in this space is Phaser. I love Phaser. This was actually used to create Vampire Survivor, who then ported it over to Unity a few months back so that he could get it running on consoles as well and to get a little bit better performance out of it. But if you played Vampire Survivor on, say, Steam, you've played a Phaser game. So it's probably the most successful title developed with Phaser, but it's used to make a ton of stuff. And in terms of features, Phaser has by far and away probably the most features of everything I talk about today. There is implementations for quite literally every concept you can think of, and the number of examples available for this guy, it's insane. There are just so many examples to learn from. So Phaser, if you're looking to do 2D JavaScript or TypeScript-based games, browser games, that kind of stuff, definitely consider checking out Phaser. Now, if a different thing, you want to work a little bit lower level, there's Pixi. Now, Pixi probably doesn't deserve to be on this list because it is not a game engine per se. It's a fast WebGL 2D renderer with a fallback layer. But you can see they even call it the HTML5 creation engine. I actually think there is a Pixi renderer in Phaser, for example. So Pixi is actually a little bit lower level, but if you want to support fast 2D rendering across a wide variety of browsers, Pixi is probably your man. If you want to have something a little bit higher level of abstractions, more things implemented for you, you're going to want to check out Phaser. Now we've also got Babylon. Now this is, again, JavaScript/TypeScript, but in 3D now, and this is a Microsoft-backed project. It's actually got Havoc physics built into it as of the most recent release. It is getting constant upgrades. It is on the cutting edge of what you can do with WebGL 3D rendering in the browser. It is a very impressive 3D framework. There's no editor per se. There is like a world placement tool, so it kind of fits in that space, but Babylon.js is really cool if you're looking to do 3D in the browser. Now, on the same topic, we've got PlayCanvas. Now, PlayCanvas that you're looking at right now doesn't actually count because this is a commercial engine with an editor. The reason why I'm mentioning it, though, is the underlying game engine used to power PlayCanvas, so that you can see this editor right here for making games in the browser, well, it is open source. So the underlying project behind PlayCanvas, the engine itself, so if you wanted to create your own tooling, you can license the PlayCanvas, or you can use the PlayCanvas engine. It is free and open source. They also have PC UI, which is the PlayCanvas UI layer. So if you want to do a cross-platform browser-based UI implementation, that is an option as well. So PlayCanvas technically isn't, but the libraries PlayCanvas are built on are. So if you're looking to do 3D, another one worth checking out. So next up, we have Three.js. Now, Three.js also kind of falls into the same category as Pixi. It's a rendering abstraction layer, but it does more than that. It's also like a scene graph and does VR and those kind of things, but it doesn't necessarily do all of the things a game engine should do. So, for example, there's no There's no audio support in there, I don't believe. I mean, I might be talking out my butt. There may actually be audio support, but it's not quite an engine. It's more like a cross-platform 3D technology that engines build upon, such as you can see, the Rogue engine right here. But there is a lot implemented in Three.js, and it's one of the most universally used layers for 3D rendering in the browser. So if you want to work JavaScript in the browser, I got you covered for both 2D and 3D frameworks there. Next up, we have Rust. And I'm going to mention one in Rust that doesn't belong, but they kind of always get mentioned together. So I'm going to do it. Now, this one definitely does belong. It is Bevy. Now, I do think that in a few years' time, Bevy will no longer be a framework and will definitely be a game engine because they are looking at making more and more of the tooling available. So there is going to be an editor at some point in time for doing, WYSIWYG world building and that kind of stuff. It's just not there yet. It doesn't exist yet. This is a code-based framework for now. Again, the terminology between framework and engine, it's kind of arbitrary. I'm using it basically to describe tooling versus no tooling. So if it's got an editor, it's an engine. If it doesn't have an editor, it's a framework. That's just the distinction I am making for this particular list. I would keep an eye on Bevy. It is probably the most successful Rust game project out there. It does use a data-driven approach, like I said earlier on, spoiler alert, when I talked about orcs. Orcs and Bevy have kind of a similar makeup for how games are structured. Again, it goes way beyond the scope of what I want to cover in this particular video, but Bevy is a project that has a lot of momentum behind it, and it's not so massively over-engineered like so many Rust projects tend to be. So if you are looking for a Rust game development framework, definitely check out Bevy. Now, I'm also including Fyrox. Fyrox is a game engine, shouldn't be on this list. It is another Rust-based game development system. Its thing is, it's got a full editor, as you can see right here, fully featured editor. So I do believe that this is a game engine and not a framework, but I can't talk about Bevy and not talk about Fyrox, because if you're looking at doing Rust game development, you're using one or the other. Again, Fyrox doesn't belong on this list, but I put it there anyways. Now, another interesting one to consider is DragonRuby. Now, it was free last weekend, and it is free periodically. There's game jams and giveaways, etc., so you can check that out, see if it comes out. This is a 2D game toolkit / game engine. The big thing about it is it actually uses the Ruby programming language. You're not going to find a lot of Ruby-based game engines out there. The only other one I can actually think of off the top of my head is there was a version of RPG Maker that used Ruby in the past. Ruby is really popular in Japan for some reason, at least it used to be. Ruby is a neat little language, and if you are a Ruby person and you want to do game development, the Dragon Engine is definitely, or DragonRuby is definitely one to check out. As you can see, it is commercial. But you'll find, again, it is given away fairly consistently, so do keep an eye out. If you're interested in it and you don't want to spend money, keep an eye out. There's a good chance it could come up for free. Now, another language that we're going to move on to now is Lua. Now, Lua is embedded as a scripting language in a ton of different projects. It used to be the scripting language behind Lumberyard and CryEngine and so on, but there was a time, and it's weird, before Unity went free, or had a free version made available, the mobile space was absolutely dominated by Lua commercial game engines. And that spun off, so we've got Love, which is a free framework for making 2D games using Lua. It's actually really cool. It's an open source project. It's very easy to work in Love. And did over Lua. So you can see, just here's how you would, for example, draw an image on screen. It is very transactional. It's a very nice, gentle introduction to the world of both programming and game development. I like Lua. I understand why some people hate the hell out of Lua, but it's one of those scripting languages that does what it says on the tin, and it's easy to learn. So I think that it makes a good beginner project, and you can do a lot with Love, which is quite cool, but it is not the only option in the world of Lua. There is also Gideros. Now, Gideros used to be a commercial project, and now it's free and open source, so that is definitely a change that happened there. Again, mobile focused in its development. As you can see here, the platforms that are supported by Gideros. I haven't checked this one out in years, to be honest, but it is definitely a Lua development framework. And the other one out there is called Solar2D, which is now also free and open source. Solar2D used to be called Corona, and actually, I believe it changed its name from Corona well before the coronavirus really ruined that branding. But Corona was one of the biggest commercial game engines for mobile development for years. And then they went through some financial hardships. They open sourced out the project, and now it is available free and open source, cross-platform game engine. It is still updated. It's got a community behind it. So if you are looking for a Lua-based development environment, there's Love, there's Gideros, and there's Solar2D. And then Java. Java has there's the JMonkey engine, which is an actual engine. It has a full editing environment and is for 3D. And then in the 2D world, and this is actually one of the things that Gamefromscratch started with, it was making tutorial series for LibGDX. This is a Java-based game development framework, and at a time, it was one of the most popular game engines for making Android games. And it still actually makes several very successful titles are made using LibGDX. Now, I know a lot of people are like, Java, ugh. And you know what? I'm not that far off from you. I'm not a big fan of Java, and I still love LibGDX in spite of that. So if you're looking for a 2D game development framework, there is a community still maintaining this. The number one maintainer of it, he's gone on to other things. But LibGDX itself is still going on. As you can see, you're still getting updates and game jams. So the last release was back in July. It's a pleasant thing to work with. It actually kind of reminded me of working with FNA, if we go back far enough in time. All things lead to FNA, it seems like, in the world of game development. And yeah, LibGDX, if you are working for a cross-platform desktop or mobile title, LibGDX is definitely one worth checking out. And then we go into the land of Haxe. Now, in Haxe, my recommendation is sort of arbitrary because there's this Shiro game technology stack, which is a thing that isn't really a thing. Now, the reason why I recommend people check it out is this has been used to make a number of very successful games, including Dead Cells, Evoland, Northgard, Darksburg, etc. It's actually a collection of technology. So you can see here, there's the heaps library, hide, DOM kit, and so on for graphics. Underneath the scenes, it uses Haxe, and then they use these bindings for various different things. So the Shiro technology stack is actually more like Haxe and heaps, and then the Castle DB system, which is, again, what it says is a database for games. These things all kind of work together to create this framework for making games. And, you know, again, it's been used to make some very successful indie-style games out there. And if you want to work with the Haxe language, it's a great selection of things to work with. Now, Haxe has a number of different lower-level things. You got, like, OpenFL, used to be called NME, and other little frameworks to build on top of. So Heaps is built on top of that lower level technology. Another option that you've got there is a bit of a splash from the past here is the Haxe Flixel, which is based off of the ActionScript / Flash library Flixel. I did a tutorial about Haxe Flixel as well. It hasn't changed a whole lot, but they are still continuing to do updates. So if you want to work, again, with Haxe, and there again, is OpenFL. So it's an ecosystem that all kind of works together, but if you want to work with the Haxe language and you're creating 2D games, Haxe Flixel is definitely still getting updated, and it is worth checking out. And now we're moving into C++ 3D game engine / rendering. So Wicked Engine could make it here, but unfortunately it has an editor, so it doesn't really fit this list. But Ka is an option out there. So this is a portable, high-performance, open-source multimedia framework. So it does a lot of the low-level things that you need. It was used as the underlying layer for the Armory Blender game engine. It's definitely one to check out. This is, again, providing more of the low-level rendering functionality. So it's kind of like SDL in 3D, if you want to think about it that way. It's cross-platform and high performance. So if you're looking to build your own 3D engine on top of an established technology, Ka is definitely worth checking out. Now, another option in kind of the exact same space, and this one is labeling itself as a rendering library. So again, I don't think you're getting sound or input management and so on, but bgfx is another one to check out. It is being used in a variety of different spaces, as you can see right here. It is all about the whole, cross-platform rendering underneath it all. Technically, it's not really an engine. It's a graphics rendering framework, but it hits that weird sort of middle layer, and I figured you wanted to know about it. Now, another one that's been around for absolute ages, one of the oldest and most successful open source projects out there, is Ogre. Now, Ogre is a graphics rendering engine, but it actually has plugins to provide a whole lot more functionality. There are a number of successful shipped titles with Ogre, and as you can see, it keeps getting updates. So it got an update in September and July. This is again, one of the longest running open source projects out there, and it has been used to make, here you can see it's made console-based projects out there. It's going to be much more low level. You don't have an editor in this environment. Rebel Galaxy, for example, Torchlight 2. Like, there's some very successful titles built on top of Ogre, but you're generally going to have to build your own tool chain here. So if you want to, you could turn Blender into an editing environment for doing your level placement, whatever. So that is the difference with Ogre. It provides the 3D rendering, the scene graph, and then again, I think there are plugins for doing things like input handling and so on, but it's not technically an engine, but it's definitely one to be aware of. It is open source and C++, by the way. And then finally, we have the Forge. Now, Forge is available open source. These are experts in crafting custom game engines and tailoring existing engines to meet your needs. So they are an engine developer, and they have created this, which is called, ironically enough, or not ironically enough, I suppose that would be the Forge. So this is a cross-platform rendering framework for a variety of different platforms. So again, not fully a framework, but you see here, it's got things like Lua scripting in there. It's got your scene graph. It's got GUI implementation with Dear I Am GUI. It abstracts away the shader programming aspects for you, but it is not all that you would need to create. So you'd still need to plug in your own physics system, for example, probably your own input handling system and so on. But it is being used, for example, here. Starfield official reveal trailer is out, and the Forge is running in AAA games like that. So the Forge is, again, more on the rendering side of things than in the full-blown game framework. Again, all these lines are pretty arbitrary. And if it did not make this list, number one, I picked a subset of what I know about, some of the best recommendations I can think of. But if you're into all of these game development frameworks, pretty much everything I talked about today, I have probably done a video on in the past on the channel. So do just check through the old videos, as you're going to find a ton of other options out there. If there's something you think I should have included on this list but didn't, or you think something I included on this list but shouldn't have, let me know that in the comments down below. And that's it. Hopefully you guys learned about a new game development framework out there. And it could be, again, maybe you just don't want to work with a game engine, but you don't want to start from scratch. That's where frameworks are absolutely masterful. Or if you've got the kind of game that doesn't really require a lot of tooling and you want to work more at the code level, frameworks might be the way to go. So let me know what you think, comments down below, and I will talk to you all later. Goodbye.